Alright, so I recorded this a week ago and then didn't get around to editing it until last night because I'm a lazy schmuck. And then last night I found that somehow I'd only recorded the first 3 minutes of it due to my stupidity. And that's a shame because it was the smartest, funniest, most handsome I've ever been. And it went on for a good 4 or 5 hours of just perfect content. You can't prove otherwise. So now I have to do it again. And out of spite for the universe and my tiny audience, I will do it shorter and worse. Anyway, I know I usually do too serious for you, crazy person ranting about the Jews and the media and that dwarf in my book club who always steals my opinions. But maybe we deserve an episode of rest. I'm sure you can tell from my annoying personality that I really like playing Dungeons & Dragons. A lot. I'm normally a blunted affect, dead stripper eyes motherfucker, walking around scowling, not enjoying life in any way. But man, do I get excited about D&D. Which doesn't happen very often. It's hard to find a group in general. Especially when you're an asshole, because now you just gotta put up with a bunch of people acting like faggots, which is the core demographic of Dungeons & Dragons. And as an edgelord retard, it's not my fault, everybody else is wrong. So this is my substitute, just telling dumb stories. And I know a lot of these are probably like dream stories or hiking trip stories or any kind of personal story. It's much more interesting and funny to me because I was there and I'm boring than it would be to you because you weren't there, but you're still boring. What are you gonna do about it? Close the video? Or Spotify episode? If I'm being honest, I really don't think about any platform but YouTube because it's the easiest one to use. Even though I think I'm on like 3 or 4 at least. Anyway, the first tale from the dndu. So I went to one of those adventurers, guild, league, whatever game name you give it, at a game shop where once a week you can just drop in and for free you can just play D&D. They'll do a one-off session. The place I went to, they did it on Wednesday. And there's this one outrageously tall girl who was all gothy. She must have been like 6'3". She looked like that monster girl from Hemlock Grove? Which is a garbage reference. No one watched that fucking trash Netflix show. She has nothing to do with the story. I just thought it was remarkable that she was so large and gothy. Anyway, we went to this Adventurers Guild Club thing. It was me and a buddy, and they got more people than expected for that night. I think largely because the two of us showed up. So they decided they'd create this overflow table. We waited a little bit after the first group started because we were waiting for one other person to show up that they knew was coming. And when we started, it was 4 people at the table. Me and my buddy, of course, and then the player we were waiting for was this quiet nurse lady, and the DM was, I don't know, some lady, but she was great. Probably the best DM I've ever played with. And I know a lot of what made this session so great for me was her just being so good at the task. She immediately read the tone of the group and ran with it and just really amped it up. I think in those gay improv circles you call this yes and. So in this one-off campaign where some group of adventurers that were hired by the mayor of some town or village to investigate weird paranormal things happening at some nearby ruins. Ghost sightings or something like that. So we head over and we run into a group of treasure hunters, NPCs. They parrot everything John Oliver tells them. And because I'm a metagaming faggot, I know from hearing the other group that was ahead of us because they started earlier, that we were meant to fight the treasure hunters. Group 1 was in combat when we first ran into them. The treasure hunters, not the Group 1. We never ran into them, but it would have been cool if at the end we fought each other. I usually like to play charisma characters when I play D&D because it's fantasy. I want to be something other than myself. and I don't think it's a viable character to have every stat at 7. So I was playing some anemic slug character with crazy charisma, and so I approached them and I bluffed and told them that we're just here to investigate. We're not interested in any of the treasure. We should just group up, they can keep all the loot, and we can get in and out faster. I'm gonna get a double-double and 2 double-doubles and 4 McDoubles. Stupid. We did all the rolls and the DM was checking and she said, holy shit, that actually worked. And so we just teamed up with them. So the DM introduced these characters, the NPCs, in the treasure hunter group, and I forget all their names except for one, because I think there were maybe 3 or 4 of them, and all but one were just forgettable pieces of furniture. They just hung around. They didn't matter at all. But the one that did matter was Keurig, a dwarf, and the DM went to great lengths to let us know who exactly this dwarf was by doing this really racist, offensive caricature of a gold-obsessed, greedy manlet rubbing her hands together like a happy merchant and everything. And Keurig was my best friend. So we continue on, we get into the ruins, and we find this pool of water that has some kind of mystical aura to it. Again, metagaming. The DM described the pool in detail, so we figured it was important somehow. And as we approached it, the DM asked if any of us looked into it, and so I thought, we should be careful about this. Hey Keurig, look in this pool. And he refused at first, so I lied to him again and told him there was gold at the bottom of it. And then Keurig looked in, and the pool showed a vision of some bad thing he did in his past. I think he stole a gold ring from his uncle or something like that. And Keurig chose not to regret it or show remorse, and was proud that he stole the ring, and cackled Jewishly. He got some debuff, a minor thing that probably didn't matter at all. And then afterwards we all looked in one by one and, made up whatever our bad memory was and expressed remorse. We got a little buff instead. We also bottled a little bit of the water in vials because somehow we got the idea that this must be holy water of some sort. Then later we come to this door that's emanating a crazy amount of heat, and the DM pointedly asked us if we touched the door. So naturally we say, no, of course not. Hey Keurig, touch this door. And he just fucking did it. I didn't even have to convince him. He just touched the door and immediately fucking died. And then, as he was lying dead on the ground, I think everyone kind of forgot that the rest of his party existed because we looted his body and took all the treasure we promised him. And then we asked the DM if we could use the holy water to revive him. And I don't think it was actually holy water, but she was like, fuck it, the tone of this whole fucking game, whatever, you bring him back. So we revive Keurig, and the first thing he does is check for his treasure because he's a greedy little dwarf Jew, and he says, where's my stuff? And we suddenly remember that there are 2 or 3 other people in his party, so we told him they took it, and they immediately start fighting. They don't even question it, they don't try to investigate. The DM just didn't care, said move forward. So the 3 of us move on, the actual human players, and we just leave Keurig fighting his teammates back there while we have all his treasure. So then we use this not actually holy water to douse the door and reduce the heat, because touching it would have killed us. And we go in, and it's an empty room with a brazier, or a brazier, Brendan Fraser. Big fantasy fire pit to cup your titties. A disembodied voice asks us a riddle, and again with the metagaming. Through our copious role-playing and Keurig killing, we'd fallen behind the other table again, and I could hear them still trying to solve the riddle, so before the voice could even finish, I let the DM finish, I wasn't rude about it. I let her finish reading out the thing, and then when I told her what I was going to do, I specified, before the voice even finishes, I use perception to try to figure out where the voice is coming from and throw a vial of holy water at it. I missed, but that action was enough to cancel riddle mode, and what turned out to be an invisible imp started combat and bit my buddy. And because we'd skipped the first fight, and this was 4th edition, we all had all our daily spells and abilities left. for what was clearly the final encounter, which probably wasn't supposed to be a fight. So this imp bit my buddy, and then we used all our dailies and just fucking pounded him into a stain on the floor. And we never even had to solve the riddle. Meanwhile, the other table was still trying to figure out the riddle. I don't know how this actually resolved this investigation that we were supposed to be conducting. But to this day, I still occasionally think about when I told Kira to touch that door and start giggling to myself. Man, she was a great DM. I should have married her. Story 2. I played a really brief campaign with some coworkers once, and most of the players were kind of new, so they didn't quite know what to do. And since I was the most experienced player, they kind of followed my lead. Or didn't, depending on how much they liked me. So the one guy who didn't really like me just made a dark, brooding ranger, which is everyone's fucking first character. But the other two, because they did like me a lot, they saw I was making this kind of goofy character. I was a chaotic good cleric of trickery. So his shtick was lying constantly to trick people into doing the right thing. So other players, one guy was a rogue who was some kind of weird undead race, and in his past life he was a sous chef. Because he's a humble guy, he knows he only would have made it to sous chef. Another one was, and to kind of explain, this was like a normie, pretty girl, office darling. Everybody thought we were terrible influences on her. She just worked closely with us, so she just, followed us into playing D&D. She never would have played without our nerd fag wiener boy influence. But she still wasn't going to take it seriously, because why would she? And so she wanted to be a dragon. And the DM, who was another guy from work and a bit slow but well-meaning, he let her. He figured out the level penalties and he let her be a dragon, and she insisted on having a donkey familiar who once a day could make waffles. So she basically played as Donkey's wife from Shrek. So we started the campaign and we're a couple of sessions in, and it's clear the DM had this, really long, epic, too deep for you story planned, and he really just wanted to railroad us through it. And maybe we should have just gone along with it to just keep the game moving, but I guess we're all assholes and we had a hard time just letting him have his fun, and so we just kept messing with him a little bit. So at one point, we all get locked in cages somehow and are being transported in a magic flying wagon through the infernal plane for some reason. Big, long, too deep for you epic storyline, not very cohesive or coherent because, the brain thing. I don't remember exactly how this happened, but in some way a random genie appeared and freed us from our cages. And I, being a charisma fag, somehow convinced the genie to platonically fall in love with me. I don't think the genie was gay, but he just loved me and he started giving me free wishes just because he liked me so much. Which already is kind of a bad move as a DM. You probably shouldn't have done that. But he was also not using the official definition of the wish spell, and he made wishes just what a novice player would think it was, where it's, you get whatever you feel like, man. Which was another bad move. And so basically I got a free genie with no wish limit because it might have been a critical success diplomacy check. So the genie just follows us around, and eventually we find an exit from the infernal plane, and for some reason this exit comes out through an oven in a restaurant. Which is kind of a fun idea. So, a group of people plus this fucking genie just pop out into the kitchen of this restaurant, and everyone's terrified. They run away. We go out into the eating area, seating area, cafeteria. There's a name for this part of a restaurant. The living room. We go out into the dining room and all the customers get scared of the genie and clear out. So we're standing in this empty restaurant, and because we're buttholes, we decided let's forget about this epic fate of the world adventure that the DM clearly has planned, and now let's open a restaurant, because this is ours now. We got a sous chef already. So we started talking about table layouts and what the menu might be, and the DM was clearly unhappy about this, but he must have done something annoying at work for me to just disregard his feelings and mock him and mess with him. He was doing it all the time, don't worry. And so he tried to kind of force us out by bringing in like the town sheriff with his band of sheriff banditos, and one of them had a genie too. So I used the command spell to command the genie's master to wish for the genie to belong to me. And I don't think the spells should work that way, but the DM allowed it, and so then I had 2 genies. And we tried various things to get out of this situation, but the DM was kind of trying to push it on us. I tried to use my favor wishes with the genie, where he just granted me free wishes because he liked me so much. And the DM started making them like monkey's paw wishes, where there'd always be some unforeseen consequence because I didn't word it right. We went back and forth with that for a while, and until we ended up in this really stupid state where the whole party was like level 20 bunnies or something, and I wish a really specific, precisely worded wish, and he couldn't find a way to undo it, so he just granted the wish, and then he had the genie form some kind of time warp rift that took us back to the start of that day's session and killed himself, and then we ended. So basically, we messed with the DM until our genie committed suicide, undid that session, and we never played again. Telling it now, it makes it sound like massive assholes, but it was kind of funny at the time. Maybe you just have to know them. Story, whatever number we're on. 3. I can count, fuck you. I played this one campaign, which also did not last very long, maybe 3 or 4 sessions. And it was horror themed, which I thought was actually pretty cool. Some of the stuff the DM did for it I thought was really interesting, and it's a really cool premise. And the party was way too big. There was like 6 or 7 of us. But the DM kind of set the premise so that all the players were siblings of some noble family, and we were out to do something for some reason. I'm a big fan of backstories that already connect the players in some way, instead of just you're all random adventurers who banded together for no clear reason. There's some restrictions on, we all had to be human, and probably alignment restrictions. And because I get into the RP side of it, I decided I was going to play a 10-year-old girl who was their sorcerer. Which was a mistake, because as the most experienced player, I should have probably taken the oldest character so I could plausibly boss around all the other players. Because you can kind of force their hand by acting petulant and saying, I'm bored, and just marching off into some other direction, and they all have to chase you because you can't let your 10-year-old sister die, but you can't overplay that, right? And so there were a lot of wasted investigations and whatever when people just weren't quite sure how to play and they did dumb things. So the way the party worked out, I was the youngest at 10 and the oldest was like late 20s. In a eunuch. Since the party was really big, I didn't know everyone there quite as well as others, and I don't think this was intentional, but it ended up working out so that the 2 guys I was closest with were also the next 2 youngest. So I was a 10-year-old girl sorcerer, and then there was a 14-year-old warlock and an 18-year-old rogue. And so within the context and premise of this campaign, it made sense that the 3 of us would be closer than we would be with the rest, because you can imagine the 10-year-old girl not being super close with the 27-year-old eunuch older brother. And it also just happened that the 2 guys that I was closer with are the 2 funniest people I know. There was a point where we were exploring some abandoned house or something looking for clues, and the DM had gotten really into the idea of passing notes. Like the idea of different party members knowing different amounts of information about stuff. And so if you wanted, you could go behind someone's back, and the DM might give you one piece of information but nobody else will know it. So what happened, we only pieced together maybe 2 months ago, and this happened in like 1943, and I'm still friends with these two guys. It's crazy. So the two of them were next to each other on the far side, and I was on the other end of the table. We were in this house investigating. One of those two found some clue, and the DM handed him a note saying what he found, so he could choose to keep it to himself if he wanted. And then another player, who was sitting next to me, she asked him to share the note with the rest of the party. And so he passed her the note, and she read it, and it said, "You're a faggot." This death glare she gave him. And just to be clear about what the note said, it was spelled in that meme way. You are a F-A-G-E-T. So my version of the story, I thought the one guy was so fucking funny that he prepared this note for no reason and held on to it just in case he had to pass a note to anyone. Which I guess is a little far-fetched for me to assume, but you don't understand how funny this guy is. But the actual explanation for the note was that they were off in a corner goofing off, passing joke notes to each other, and they just happened to have it on hand when the opportunity to pass a note came up. So that's what happened. But there's more to it, to this campaign, not that story. That story is done. Move on. Life goes on, okay? You gotta let go of the past. Later in this campaign, the Warlock and I, still being children/teens, we ran into some local kids in the town we were in, and this town had this thing going on where it wasn't safe for adults to go out at night, but children could, for some reason. We didn't get far enough into the campaign to find out why. And there was something about the dead coming back, and people weren't entirely sure what was going on, but it was a horror-themed campaign, so there were zombies or something. So we ran into these kids and got to talking, and they invited us to come out late at night to do hood rat things with their hood rat friends. We were talking about going, and we decided we would tell the 18-year-old because he's an adult we can talk to, but he's young enough that we still connect with him. I think from an RP perspective it makes perfect sense, but maybe we should have metagamed a little more and just included the rest of the party. What ended up happening was, we told him, he said, "Alright, fine, I'll come out with you just to keep an eye on you," and so the three of us snuck out at night while everybody else was sleeping, which means half the party had to just sit there and watch us do something really fun. Like I said, it makes sense in RP world, it's kind of shitty from a metagaming standpoint, but the DM also kind of enabled this. Maybe he expected us to invite the whole party. I don't know. Anyway, we went out at night, we snuck out, and pretty quickly we got separated because I don't remember what it was, but whatever thing was dangerous for adults and not children came after us, and so 18-year-old had to run off, the rogue. As a reminder, because you're probably not listening that closely, 18-year-old is the rogue, 14-year-old is warlock, 10-year-old is sorcerer. That's me. So the rogue runs off to go hide and escape, and the warlock and I just keep going and meet up with the kids. Because we don't value family, I guess. This fucking generation. So we meet with these kids at the cemetery. There's a fence that surrounds the cemetery, which is full of zombies. And one of these older kids decides he wants to be alpha male, and he challenges the 14-year-old, the warlock, to some kind of gay leotard balance beam contest on the top of the fence. So they both jump up there and flex at each other, and he manages to knock the warlock into the cemetery where the zombies are. But the warlock has a spell where he can swap positions with an enemy, and so he swapped positions with the kid on top of the fence and then jumped down on the safe side, and we just watched the kid get fucking eaten by zombies. Meanwhile, while the warlock was killing a kid, the rogue jumped onto a roof of a low building, like a hut in the slums, to try to escape whatever it was that was chasing him. And his idea for how to get away was, I know, I'll light a torch and start a fire to create a distraction so I can run away in this ghetto full of thatch roofed huts. And he did get away. We all made it back to the inn at the end of the night. But he pretty much just burned down the fucking ghetto. He lit this fire that just fucking destroyed everything. Which relates to another thing. I don't know if the rest really deserve stories beyond just quick descriptions of what happened. But there's one campaign where I played with a different group of coworkers, and I was being a real shithead. I made a character that was a sorcerer, but he really wanted to be a swashbuckler. And so I'd frequently make myself completely useful in fights by running up and trying to hit people with my sword. And it became a staple of my presence or my strategy. I attack someone with a sword, I miss, and then I use a fire stick to just start a fire. And because I think that'll help somehow. And so what always fucking happened was I would start a fire, we would finish the fight, and then we'd have to put out a fire that didn't help us in any way. And one of the other players, he played a giant fucking monk, like a 300-pound dude whose name was Sandy Claus, and he was a grapple monk. And somehow it came to pass that grappling just kept happening a lot, even without him initiating. And I remember one where we were fighting crabs, and being a retard, I ran in and just tried to hit one of the crabs with my sword and fucking missed. And then like 3 or 4 crabs just latched onto me and I was just grappled by a million crabs. Those 3 or 4 crabs multiplied to 1,000,000 in one round. Crabs just do that, man. Go to college. And so as I was just getting pinched to death by crabs, Santa Claus came over and just wormed himself into every grapple. Like if you were hugging someone and then Jesus came and slipped into the middle, like, hold on, let Jesus in here. And then he just pummeled the crab to death and then he'd worm his way into the next grapple. I don't know, that's probably not funny if you weren't there, but just the mental image for me of anytime anyone is wrestling or hugging, he slipped into the middle of it. Other non-stories. Oh, actually, this was the retard swashbuckler sorcerer. He was eventually raped to death. Which isn't how I would have chosen to die. And the DM was kind of woke. I'm surprised she did this. I guess at the time, rape was still a joke. Even for woke people. But it's some kind of succubus demon thing, and she mind controlled me, had me go through a portal, and afterwards my party thought we could look for him in this building that we're in, or we could just go look for loot. And Sandy Claus, God bless his soul, he wanted to look for me and save me. Everybody else overrode him because there were like 3 other people and they said, nah, I really need 30 gold and a rope. And then eventually, as they're finishing their circuit of the building collecting loot, they come into a room and find me tied to a bed, raped to death. It was literally one room over from the room where I was put into a portal. Where they were making the decision to look for me, I was one room to the right, and they said, now let's just go do a loop of the building going to the left and look for loot. Although thinking about it now, what a shitty demon. All she could do is portal me to the next room? That's a fucking door. Anyway, before I was pretending to lose count of what story we're on, but now I've actually lost count. There's one campaign that we started and literally never got past the first session. We never even got to the point where we were an actual party. The DM had this idea where we would all participate in a race across the city as a sort of bonding event. Team building exercises. Which seems weird. I don't know how competing head to head would strengthen bonds, but I'm autistic, I don't fucking know. Anyway, in this race, I was playing this white knight sword mage type character. Lawful good, protect everybody, do all the right things. Another guy was a similarly goody two-shoes cleric. Actually the same player as the 14-year-old warlock who killed a kid. Every saint has a past. Get off your high horse. And then the DM's girlfriend, who was a lawful good druid. And then her brother, who was a rogue. And I love the guy, but his alignment was basically chaotic retard. He would do such outlandish shit that he'd basically sideline himself. I think he actually got himself arrested really early in the session, and he basically just did nothing for the whole fucking race. There were also some NPC racists. And what ended up happening was, much like the girl who played the dragon in that one story, whatever number that was, the druid kind of didn't take it seriously and was like, this is a video game, I'm gonna do whatever, and use her create fire spell to create fires all over the place, lighting a town on fire for no reason. And so the cleric and I would, fight these fires. I'd set up some kind of bucket chain to put the fire out. The cleric was healing people who were caught in the fire. And then further up in the race, the druid ran into one of the NPC racers, a hobgoblin, doused him in oil and lit him on fire, getting a lot of miles out of this create fire spell. I think the cleric saved his life. At the end of the race, he had to climb a tower, and that was way far back because I'm bad at video games. But the cleric was up at the end, and the druid was still attacking people to try to win the race, so the cleric used some weird spell he had that just summoned me across the fucking city to help stop her. And so I started attacking her, just trying to bring her down, save lives. Just doing my duty, ma'am. And the DM lowered the tower by 1 level, so she magically won automatically and the session was over. And I remember being really butthurt that she was playing out of alignment and kind of ruining the session. But then I posted about it on Reddit because I'm a soy boy, or I was back then at least. And still am. I fucking love Marvel, bro. In all the comments on the thread in Reddit, we're talking about how it sounded like it was actually a great opportunity to roleplay my character and the cleric's character. And to be fair, it was. And I think looking back on it, I wasn't really butthurt about what actually happened in the session, but more about just overall behavior. Because we never played again after that. Everybody was a little bit upset at the end of that session, and that campaign just died. And I remember both the DM and the girlfriend, the druid, were trying to blame the cleric because he was watching anime on his phone when people took 10 minutes to do a turn. And yeah, it's kind of rude, but stop being retarded and taking 10 minutes to do a turn. So the complete failure of that session, they said was his fault, and that seemed unfair to me. And I guess I was just butthurt about that when it was clearly the druid who, like the dragon, just got into it, didn't really care that much, didn't take it seriously, and set in motion a course of events where we're all naturally opposed to each other and trying to kill each other. I just didn't really like her. And so everything is her fault. Look, in real life, my charisma is 7. Just like my wisdom, intellect, strength, the rest of them. If my intellect were higher, I would know what the rest of them are. I don't know, dude. I want to play so badly, but it's so hard to find a group. It's so hard to get people to actually commit to playing anything. And if you do, they're usually faggots. It's not my fault, it's everybody else. The common theme in every story is not me being an asshole. You shut your whore mouth. I'll even offer to DM even though I'm not that good at it. My stories are usually pretty interesting. I can come up with interesting mechanics. I try to improv well, but
he couldn't show it to me, but he has a gun.
I struggle a lot to be enthusiastic and have any sense of showmanship. I'm sure you figured it out from this podcast. I'm not a very engaging person. I got dead eyes, dead voice. I talk about the gayest shit like fucking natural hierarchies. Who fucking cares, man? Fucking do anime reviews, you piece of shit. I think I've now committed myself to talk about natural hierarchies next time. Or I won't. I don't know you shit.